X, are you okay? This is X, and he's a great guy, high IQ. He's a high IQ individual.
No one anticipated it. Elon Musk was giving his major speech 1 minute, and then his 4-year-old son, A-12, took over the microphone on live television. The audience sent forth a startled gasp. What came next was surprising. Unfazed by the attention, the boy made a daring remark that shocked onlookers. Because it was so impromptu, the world was unprepared for his brief but powerful statement, which cemented the occasion in viral history. The focus is stolen by Elon Musk's son. With cameras rolling, lights gleaming, and the crowd holding their breath, the stage was a hive of activity. This was no ordinary occurrence. At an Elon Musk event, one may anticipate audacious concept, wild forecasts, and possibly even a couple of robots. Everything had a dramatic, even presidential sense because of the American flags that surrounded the stage. From tech billionaires to inquisitive fans, everyone in the audience knew they were about to witness something significant. However, no one was prepared for what actually transpired. Grimes was sitting in the front row with her 4-year-old son, A-12, also known as X. It was surprising that they were there at all. Like wildfire, the murmurs swept across the audience. Was this anything that was planned? As the youngest Tesla engineer, was X set to make his public debut? Grimes attempted to keep her youngster calm while sporting her signature futuristic meets goth look. However, that child was as energetic as a rocket. His brain was obviously operating at full speed as his wide eyes raced from the stage to the cameras to the sea of people surrounding him. Elon, meanwhile, entered the stage to thunderous cheers. His expression was that of a man who had likely been up for 48 hours straight contemplating Mars colonies, composed as usual. The crowd became silent as he raised a hand. He said, "Thank you for coming tonight, and I simply want to express my gratitude for making it possible. Thank you." His words reverberated throughout the enormous arena and on millions of TVs across the globe. We're revealing a concept tonight that has the potential to completely alter the future. Something that contradicts all of our preconceived notions. The audience was captivated, but Tiny X wasn't. Like a restless artificial intelligence that had just figured out an intractable equation, the child was restlessly fidgeting in Grimes' lap. Pointing to his father on stage, he pulled at her sleeve, probably something along the lines of, "Stay put, little dude," Grimes murmured to him. But X didn't want to remain in one place. It started out as little squirms and motions. Then he wriggled out of his mother's grasp with the will of a kid on a sugar rush. The audience chuckled softly, supposing this was a sweet moment. However, X was on a mission. He fixed his gaze like a homing rocket on the stage. Then he got to his feet. It was already too late when Grimes reached out. The XEA-12 was moving. As he strode boldly onto the stage, the audience's laughter changed to gasp. Everything was captured by the cameras. Unfazed by the blazing lights and large crowd, millions of people at home watched in awe as this small human approached one of the most well-known men in the world. Elon briefly hesitated after catching the movement out of the corner of his eye. There was a problem. He had to quickly switch gears because his mind was generally occupied with figuring out the mechanics of interplanetary travel. Little XEA-12 moved before anyone could respond. Elon was in the midst sweeping speech on the future of civilization. Then his 4-year-old kid had strode at it, grabbed the microphone, and snatched it from him. Live on TV, the whole world froze for 2 full seconds. With the exception of the subtle hum of the live broadcast feed, the room became eerily quiet. Everyone in the audience, including journalists, tech executives, and space enthusiasts, gaped in disbelief. Millions of people at home gaped at what they saw, and in the midst of it all, little X held his ground, clutching the microphone as if he had just deposed Tesla's CEO. He didn't feel anxious. He was not doubting himself. It didn't matter that he had just interrupted one of the year's most anticipated events. It didn't matter about the cameras or the light. There was something he wanted to say. With her hand lingering in midair as if she wanted to beckon him back, Grimes partially got up from her chair, but she realized it was too late. A mixture of slight terror, enjoyment, and the resigned expression of a parent whose child just did something utterly wild in public characterized her expression. The crowd changed, with some murmuring and others laughing uncomfortably. Did the show include this? An unexpected disclosure? In the middle of a keynote, had Elon simply handed the torch to his son? Then the room echoed with laughter. To his credit, Elon bounced back fast. He shifted slightly to the side and cocked his head in a slightly uncomfortable but amused manner at X. He continued in a casual tone, "Looks like we have a new speaker tonight." But his eyes darted to Grimes as though he were asking him in a whisper, "What now?" X glanced up at his father while continuing to hold the microphone. The crowd held their breath. Was he going to say something? Under the blazing stage lights, A-12 stood by himself now, holding the microphone in both hands as though he were going to give the speech of a lifetime. The child was barely tall enough to reach his father's waist, but here he was, standing right where Elon Musk had just been discussing changing the course of history. The spectators, completely quiet. Everyone in the room, even reporters who had covered 100 Tesla debuts and Silicon Valley executives, held their breath. This 4-year-old was about to say what? Was this a cute moment for a toddler? Or were they going to see the most surprising news conference ever? X blinked at the sheer volume of faces staring back at him as he gazed out into the sea for a second. He appeared smaller due to the enormous displays behind him, yet he showed no signs of being afraid. He wasn't restless. He wasn't searching for his mother. He was in total control of the situation and simply stood there with his microphone in hand. Then he said, "Daddy says robots will take over the world," in a voice that was remarkably clear for a child of his age. It came down like a meteor. The collective was virtually audible. What? Reverberate across the space. Most just sat there, transfixed, while a few laughed nervously. Some glanced about, as though they were waiting for Elon to say yes or no. Others simply stared at the small human who had just made a remark that sounded like something from a dystopian science fiction film. The face of Elon? Shock and, "Oh no, he didn't just say that," mixed together. That night, for the first time, he appeared truly confused. His normally unflappable calm briefly faltered. Grimes, on the other hand, was witnessing a slow-motion automobile collision, with her hands over her mouth and her eyes jumping between Elon and her son. She was aware that X was a bright youngster, but this was probably unexpected. After a brief period of lightheartedness, the atmosphere in the room changed. A small child was now carrying a heavier object as they ran on stage. X was 4 years old, to be true, but he didn't invent that. With a seasoned speaker's hold on the microphone, A-12 stood there, waiting for his audience to fully get the seriousness of what he was saying. He didn't feel anxious. He wasn't restless. He was unaware that in front of some of the most influential individuals in the world, he had just triggered a tiny existential crisis. The quiet continued. Everyone was taken aback. The audience as a whole was still in shock. Did the child say what I believe he said? It was more than just his words. He said it that way. That uncanny, childlike clarity that made the most outrageous claim seem like an indisputable fact. Daddy claims that robots will take over the world. This is a straightforward, unambiguous statement that may or may not come to pass. Elon, who is normally quick to joke or pivot smoothly, genuinely paused. The man who had a solution for everything seemed to be without one for once. All eyes were on him to confirm, refute, or explain why his 4-year-old was already discussing AI domination when his son nonchalantly declared the robo-apocalypse on live television. Grimes, still sitting, appeared to be feeling all the emotions at once. Her hands were gripped together, and her face was stuck in a state of laughter, fear, and apprehension. Let this moment stop immediately, for heaven's sake. The audience erupted in uncomfortable laughter. Some laughed thinking this was just a harmless child's antic. Others looked at each other anxiously, attempting to determine whether this was a serious matter for them. Had his father's true ambitions just been disclosed by this child? Was A-12 Skynet's initial official spokesperson? And X changed his hold on the microphone just as the tension was about to subside. He wasn't finished. Daddy says that when I grow up, I might build robots. This statement was the aftershock if the first one had fallen like a meteor. Elon responded more quickly this time. He stepped forward and touched his son's shoulder with caution. His demeanor was a bit too composed, the type of artificial serenity one employs to diffuse a situation before it gets out of control. He forced a smile and remarked, "That's some big ambition right there. However, let's postpone the speeches that will change the world for a few more years." The tension persisted even after the audience laughed once again. Slowly, Elon grabbed for the microphone. XEA-12 held on to the microphone for a long time. He remained there for a bit, holding it hard, as though he was debating whether or not to give up his stage time. His gaze was serious, as if he understood he had just spoken something significant and wasn't prepared to back down, and his tiny fingers were clasped around the metal. Then at last, he relaxed. Grimes, who was now standing on the stage's edge, gestured softly for him to return to her. She simply wanted this moment to go. She wasn't desperate or demanding. However, X paused. Rather of sprinting towards her, he turned and gazed up at Elon, who had an expression that could only be characterized as unadulterated, unwavering confidence.
"You said that," he whispered. Despite the silent microphone to capture, Elon, clearly agitated, blinked.
For a brief while, his normally impenetrable visage wavered. He then put a hand on X's shoulder and led him carefully off the platform after giving him a slight nod. The crowd exploded after that. Applause began as sporadic claps and progressed to a standing ovation. For that moment, not for some major technological announcement or groundbreaking discovery, people would talk about that kind of occasion for years to come, the type that would be captured on video and repeatedly aired on the internet. However, beneath the cheers, the room's vibe was strange. They weren't merely clapping with laughter. That hadn't been some dumb kid babbling. Therefore, they were analyzing and thinking. That had seemed incisive, as if Elon's 4-year-old had just revealed something inappropriate to the world. When X got to Grimes, she knelt down and embraced him, holding him for a fraction of a second longer than was required. Relief and disbelief were mixed together on her face. Did it really just happen? Her lips moved very little as she mumbled something to him, but it was obvious from her expression that she was still processing what had just happened. She was seen on tape, staring up at Elon. Her expression was obvious even if she remained silent.
"Now what?" Standing at the stage, Elon let out a harsh. He paused, long enough to hold on to the podium's edges and gather him, and then he laughed softly, a little forcedly, somewhat too tight.
At a live event, you can never predict what will occur. The tension persisted despite the kind laughter from the audience. That uncomfortable, lingering sense that something more significant had just occurred. Rolling his shoulders back as though he were physically resetting, Elon inhaled deeply. My son noted that what he just shared speaks to the kind of ambition we aspire to inspire in future generations, even though he was perhaps a little ahead of his time. Large-scale concepts, audacious plans, and perhaps even a little mischief along the way. Elon's attempt to lighten the mood was met with laughter from the audience, but the tension persisted like static in the air. Others were still absorbing what had just transpired, while others were shifting in their seats and exchanging glances. Grimes, meanwhile, had returned to her chair, XEA-12, and was sitting on her lap as if nothing had occurred. Unfazed, he had already moved on, toying with a small toy he had taken out of his pocket. It seemed as though he hadn't just interrupted his father's live presentation and said something that made millions of people pay attention. Now that he was back in the zone, Elon carried on with the presentation, speaking more fluidly, but occasionally, as though half expecting another surprise, he glanced at Grimes and his son. To be honest, the audience was as well, because let's face it, Whatever innovative invention Elon had in store for us has already taken a backseat to the speech and the big reveal. Technology was no longer the focus of this evening. It has to do with that instant, the unplanned, unedited revelation of a 4-year-old and the disturbing weight it carried. Was it merely a child echoing what he had heard, or had X simply validated something Elon wasn't prepared to share with the world in passing? The air was heavy with that inquiry. When it appeared that everything would calm down, A-12 leaned over Grime and muttered something. She hardly noticed the slightest change in her expression, but she did realize that she didn't want him to utter whatever he had just spoken aloud. With a tiny shake of her head, she tightened her hold on him, as if she were begging him in silence. "Don't do that again, please." However, X had different plans. He wriggled free before she could stop him. Once more, he didn't sprint to the center of the stage this time. He didn't pick up the microphone. He simply approached the brink. His small figure stood there watching, silhouetted against the brilliant lights. The audience fell silent. Grimes appeared ashamed. She seemed to want to grab him, but knew it was too late as her hand lingered in midair. Elon had paused in the middle of his sentence. Then X yelled out, "Daddy said I'll build really smart robots soon," in that same little but crystal clear voice. There was no drama in the word. Nobody yelled at them. However, they made a harsh landing. Even though the sentence seemed so straightforward, it wasn't. For a moment, no one moved. When it occurred, Elon had been in the middle of a statement. Once more, Elon looked to his kid as soon as A-12's voice broke the stillness, and the tightness in his face vanished for a moment. In the smallest smile, the edges of his mouth quirked up as if he couldn't decide whether to be amused or genuinely worried. He let out a breath. Finally, he said, "You're not incorrect." He spoke in a casual yet purposeful tone, as if he had finally come to terms with the reality that his 4-year-old had totally ruined his event. "When I retire, I suppose we already know who will take over." The audience adored it. There was laughter. There was a round of applause. The tension then suddenly broke like glass. Elon approached, picked up A-12 with ease, and carried him back to Grimes, who appeared, well, a mix of relieved and worn out. "Now, before my 4-year-old decides to reveal them all first, let's return to tonight's big ideas," Elon remarked, giving the audience a sly wink. One more round of laugh. There was something else lingering behind the lighter mood that suddenly pervaded the gathering.
That time was that entirely unforeseen. People were going to remember that. Not the show, not the latest technology.
Soon later, the gathering came to an end, and Elon gave his final remarks with his customary assurance. However, everyone in the room was aware that someone else had already taken the night. The Musk family huddled together in a secluded area backstage, away from the cameras that were flashing, and the sea of people who were still talking about what had happened. As though she was still processing the idea that he had just casually stolen the show, Grimes held X-12 on her lap. However, X was totally unconcerned. He was contentedly playing with the small toy he had hidden in his pocket, as if the last 20 minutes hadn't just caused a stir in the tech community. The stillness was broken first by Grime. She shook her head and exhaled slowly. Half to herself, half to Elon, she muttered, "I certainly didn't envision tonight unfolding that way." Although she seemed amused, there was still a hint of incredulity in her voice, as if she was still getting used to reality. After thoughtfully massaging his jaw and leaning back in his chair, Elon quietly laughed. He acknowledged that he has good instincts. Beyond the curtain, backstage, the event's hum continued. However, a peculiar silence had descended upon their small nook. Sitting side by side, Elon and Grimes watched their son, who had just unknowingly made news around the world. X-12 was sitting peacefully on Grimes' lap, playing with his small toy and kicking his feet absently. There was no worry or hesitation, just a 4-year-old who expressed his thoughts and then quickly went on. Elon smirked and shook his head, letting out a breath. A bit too good, perhaps? Grimes glanced at him and arched an eyebrow. You told him that one day he might construct robots, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Elon shrugged. We've spoken a couple times. However, he didn't anticipate making his first announcement live on television. They both chuckled softly, but there was a lingering feeling underneath it, as if they were still processing what had just transpired. A little later, Elon leaned forward and placed a hand on the small shoulder of A-12. He said, "You know," in a calmer tone, "maybe give me a heads up the next time, even though you might have stolen the show tonight." A-12 looked up at his father and simply smiled, utterly unconcerned.
Not in a cheeky manner, it seemed more as though he was truly unaware of consequences.
His comments had already caused the world to spin, with people examining, evaluating, and speculating. However, he saw it as just another discussion with his father. Grimes and Elon looked at one another, both of them aware that this moment, this absurd, unexpected, completely crazy moment, would be discussed for years to come. However, the actual question remained unanswered. Was it merely naive, childish interest? Or did XEA12, in his own way, just disclose something that Elon Musk had not yet intended to make public? What are your thoughts? Please share your opinions in the comments section below, and remember to subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed this video. See you at the following.